very pleased to have all of you here today and to join in on the mental health series for these webinars. If you're not familiar with United Way of Hastings, we've been in our community for over 55 years. And every dollar we raise stays right here in our community. As you can see from the slide, we run internal programming such as the Food for Kids weekend meal packs, of course, the Helping Kids Succeed initiative. We also help fund other nonprofits in our community that are providing direct services. And we collaborate with many groups throughout the year, many groups through this initiative, the Helping Kids Succeed Community Partners meetings. That meets 4 times per year. And out of our discussions and in those meetings, this series of webinars came to light. So again, very pleased to have all of you here. Thank you for joining us. And Jane, I'll send it back to you.
Great. We'll stop that share and we're going to turn it over to Kate Bartlett. Kate is with NAMI Minnesota, and we're very pleased to have her with us today. She is, I'm telling you just a little bit about her. She is with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI, and there is a Minnesota chapter. Kate leads NAMI's parent education and support projects in Dakota and Scott counties as a project coordinator and parent educator. She works one-on-one with families to help them navigate the special education and mental health care system and coordinates educational events. Her background is in direct children's mental and behavioral health services, and she's a certified Mad to Glad parent coach. I probably could have used some of that when my daughter was younger. She has published 1 children's book and hopes to publish more in the future. Kate is the parent of 2 kids and speaks to strategies that she's used both professionally and in her personal life. In her free time, she enjoys swimming, reading, writing, and being outdoors. And today would be a great day for that. Thanks for joining us, Kate.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to participate. This week is just filled with great speakers and great content. So I'm going to get my screen shared. There we go. Let's get that. All right, hopefully that will get going. So today we're going to be kind of talking about mental health. What is it? What's the difference between mental health and a mental health disorder? And really the purpose of today is I wanted to provide you guys with a solid foundation of understanding the difference between a diagnosis or a diagnosable mental health condition and just kind of understanding what this mental health word means. So we're going to talk a little bit about diagnoses, some symptoms, some things to watch out for, and just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to how to respond to those symptoms, which will hopefully lead you into the great content coming the next couple of days. A little bit about me and about NAMI. Jane, thank you so much for the great introduction. Again, I'm a parent educator, and some of the work that we do in Dakota and Scott counties is working really intensively with parents, helping them navigate this system, how to access care and support for their children, from the first symptoms and wondering, is this something that I should be concerned about, all the way to parents who know their child has a diagnosis and they need higher levels of support. So whether you fall anywhere in that spectrum, you're more than welcome to reach out to us at NAMI and we can kind of help connect you with whatever it is that you're needing. Minor disclaimer, I am not at my best today. I am recovering from a cold, so please bear with me if I am sniffling or coughing at all. And then since it is a smaller group, I want to remind you guys that I am totally comfortable with turning this into a discussion. And so if you want to unmute and contribute or ask questions that way, please do so. Otherwise, you can use the chat box and we can talk that way. So let's get started. So first of all, what is mental health? We all have mental health, just like we all have physical health. When you think of physical health, you might think about, eating right, taking care of your physical body by exercising. You might think of, doing regular checkups with your doctor for cholesterol, heart rate, blood pressure, those types of things come to mind when we think of physical health. Well, mental health is the same thing. We all have mental health, A healthy mind means feeling good and being able to enjoy and participate in all aspects of life that you want to or are expected to do. Being able to deal with emotions and stress and all of the challenges of daily life in healthy or positive ways. And breaking that down a little bit further, when we talk about dealing with stress in healthy and positive ways, it means, when we have a stressor in life, and I can dive a little bit deeper about what a stressor is as we go on as well. But when we have a stress or something that's challenging us in our life, responding in a healthy or positive way means doing so in a way that promotes our long-term health. That's, coping in a way that isn't going to put us at danger or at risk for other health complications. I talk a lot with my parents recently about all of the different ways that we're coping with the stress of COVID-19, and that there are lots of healthy and maybe unhealthy ways that we might be coping currently. And you don't need to be judgmental or angry at yourself if you are finding yourself coping in less than ideal ways, but it's good to notice that. And when I say unhealthy, some of the things that come to mind for me are using substances like alcohol or smoking to cope with stress. That's typically what we mean when we're saying unhealthy. And we'll dive a little bit deeper into that as we go on, but that's to get started. Mental health can be maintained with good habits. Just like physical health, there are ways to keep your mind healthy with daily habits. What are mental health conditions? Mental health conditions are medical illnesses, just like physical illnesses. The difference is the symptoms of mental health conditions are behaviors. It can change the way people think, feel, and act. Mental health conditions are common and treatable. Mental health conditions are not anyone's fault or something to be ashamed of. And they're absolutely not limiting. People with mental health conditions can go on to achieve huge, big, great, wonderful goals. There are many celebrities out there that self-identify as living with bipolar disorder or anxiety disorder, which are a couple of the diagnoses we'll cover a little bit later on. But that's just to say that having a mental illness or a mental health condition does not mean that you're limited in any way. Diving a little bit deeper, mental illnesses are brain disorders that affect thinking, moods, feelings, and the ability to relate to others. Again, they are medical illnesses whose symptoms are behavior. It is really important for all of us at NAMI to help people understand that mental illnesses are medical illnesses. They deserve the same type of attention, care, and treatment that any other physical illness would have. When I say physical illness, I mean things like colds, heart disease, diabetes, all of those things where you would seek a doctor at the first onset of symptoms. You would seek out a doctor, you would be able to access treatment and hopefully find funding for treatment in an equitable and financially affordable way. We want the same care to go into the treatment of medical or mental illnesses. Are there any questions so far, or is that feeling comfortable to everybody?
Kate, I just have a question. You talked about the mental health and then mental conditions and then on to the mental illness. Is a mental illness a mental condition? Are they
Great question.
synonymous?
Yeah, they are. We kind of use them a little bit interchangeably. I haven't done a full definition search on Google. I know I use them a little bit interchangeably. It has to do with language and stigma for me. Sometimes when I use the word mental illness to families, it calls to mind some of the things that maybe they've taken in through media or their history. And illness, hearing that word first, can be a little bit startling, or they think of things that they've seen in movies or media that maybe aren't true. So I start with mental health condition, And then we hope to kind of break down that barrier of mental health condition and mental illness. They're the same thing, and it's not a bad thing. And it's the same as a medical illness. So again, behavior is the main symptom right now that doctors and clinicians have to observe and diagnose mental health conditions or mental illnesses. Behavior is the language used to communicate that something is wrong. So mental illnesses are medical illnesses that exist in the brain, and they affect behaviors of people. And it's the observable behaviors that parents, teachers, youth, clinicians use to identify and begin to understand what might be going on and whether or not some additional support is needed. So we see behaviors are like the part of the iceberg that's visible, what we can observe, what we can see with our eyes. And we have several lists that we're going to go through about some of these observable behaviors, some of these symptoms that we can see. But it's really just the tip of the iceberg, because underneath that surface level are all of the emotions, the things that are driving the behavior. And it's really, really important to understand that the behaviors that we're seeing a person display are really just a symptom of what is maybe happening or kind of has been interrupted in their brain. And that's why we seek treatment, is to address the symptoms and heal the brain. There's a really beautiful anxiety iceberg out there. I didn't include that for this presentation because this presentation wasn't solely about anxiety, but using anxiety as an example, sometimes the observable behaviors we see in a person with anxiety might be things like being reserved, being really quiet, or even being with really young kids, having tantrums or meltdowns, or aggressive behaviors can kind of show up in some types of anxiety. So we see that on the surface level, and parents and teachers and educators might think, this child needs consequences. They need to be pushed. They need to be, additional discipline strategies. But really, if you then see that big iceberg and that those behaviors are a result of anxiety and being fearful and kind of that overreactivity in that part of the brain, the way you're going to treat and respond to those behaviors is very different than if you see these behaviors and assume that a child is being willfully difficult or disobedient or misbehaving. So it's really, really important to see behaviors as a form of communication. And if a behavior is concerning to you or upsetting, seeing it as a sign that there might be something else going on, and trying to dig a little bit deeper to what's going on underneath. A few facts about mental health, specifically in youth. 20% of youth ages 13 to 18 experience a mental health condition in a given year. And 50% of youth ages 8 to 15 with a mental health condition don't receive treatment. And I think this is a really big number for me that I like to call attention to, because again, when you're talking about an illness whose main symptoms are behaviors, it can be really hard to differentiate between what is a behavior that's the result of a mental illness or a symptom, and what is a behavior that's just associated with being a teen or an adolescent. And how do you differentiate between the two, and how do you respond? My suggestion to parents is, if a behavior is showing up in your kids, or if you're a youth watching this and you are noticing something in yourself that just doesn't seem right, it never hurts to ask for some extra support. There is absolutely no risk of reaching out and getting more information about a behavior or about a symptom that you're seeing and having it go nowhere. That's totally okay. It's much better to act early and ask questions and have it be nothing than put it off or just assume that it means one thing.
Kate, let me ask just a quick question.
Absolutely.
If the folks on the call or who are watching the video later, if they know of a youth who may need some support, or it's the youth themselves, who would you suggest talking to? Is the first step maybe the counseling staff at the schools?
Definitely. So for youth, I'd think of your web of support, your anchors, and then go to those people first. Any type of trusted adult or caring figure in your life. If you are a youth and you're feeling like something is off with your behavior, with your thoughts, talk to one of your anchors and tell them what's going on and get their help. If you are the anchor, if you're the adult and you have a youth in your mind who you'd like some extra support with, you can reach out to us at NAMI. You can reach out to school counselors. Many schools have school-linked mental health professionals or school social workers. You can directly call clinicians or psychologists, depending on your area or who your service providers are. Pediatricians or general care physicians are also a great first step. If you're noticing behaviors in yourself or your child, they can be a great person to make referrals or help you dig a little bit deeper on those behaviors.
I think that for anyone who's listening who isn't sure where to start, I know we had an experience with a family member that was challenging, and it was when we finally did find help through one of the crisis response units, not in Dakota County, we weren't living here at the time. I had no idea that those resources were available to families. And so they really helped when we were in the middle of our situation. And I would just really encourage people to reach out and connect, because NAMI, if you're not sure where to start, NAMI's probably pretty good, as are the staffs at the high school, any of the schools. It makes a huge difference. And Morris has a great comment down in the chat. He said, I would just suggest the person that a youth seeks out does not see mental illness as a fault or something to be ashamed of. 100% agree. Thank you, Morris. That's one of the reasons we're doing these webinars, is it's just so important for people to be able to talk about what's happening both with them, with people that they love, that they care about, and that it's not. I often use the example, it's like glasses, right? We don't blame someone because their eyeballs are a different shape. We have glasses, and that's a tool that helps us see better. And so there's tools available to help people who are dealing with mental health conditions.
Absolutely. I've used that similar example, Jane, where you wouldn't deny someone a wheelchair and tell them to just, get over it, or,
Right.
like use grit and determination and just rise above. No, you'd provide them with the support that they need to be as successful as they want to be or can be.
Definitely.
So one of the things that I suggest, and I can't remember if it's on a slide coming up or not, but I'll address it now. One of the biggest suggestions I make to parents and adults and educators that I work with is one of the ways to start reducing that stigma is by having open conversations with your youth, around your youth, about mental health. Not necessarily directly at them or asking them, do you feel like you have anxiety or depression? But just talking about those things and not making it seem like a scary or negative, a fault or something that they should be ashamed of. Just addressing those feelings openly and making it, we have a wonderful young adult speaker who I can actually link her story. I can send that to Jane, but she calls it dinner table conversations. That she grew up in a household where there was many people with mental illnesses, and they made it just part of their dinner table conversations where they would have check-ins, emotional check-ins, and they would just use this language daily. So it was never a scary or unfamiliar terrain when one of the children in the house felt like something was starting to go awry. It was a very normal next step in the conversation. Yeah. Half of all lifetime cases of mental illness start by the age of 14, and 3/4 of lifetime cases have begun by the age of 24. And the reason I bring this back to light in this setting is because we as parents and educators of youth have a huge opportunity to act early. Remember that statistic from the last slide, about 50% don't receive treatment. And without treatment, those mental illnesses can get more severe, or it can bring on new symptoms or new mental illnesses. So having this information in the back of your mind, having tools and resources at your disposal can hopefully help to start reducing these statistics and making some real change. So we're going to start talking a little bit about warning signs. These are some general ones, and we'll go through a few of the more common diagnoses a little bit later on, but these are just a few warning signs that are kind of across the board to consider. Feeling very sad or withdrawn for more than 2 weeks. Severe out of control risk-taking behaviors that cause harm to self or others. When I talk to parents of adolescents, I feel like this is one of the ones that they question, what is normal adolescent risk-taking, pushing and challenging limits, and what is the sign of something more? There's really no clear right or wrong answer. It really has to more do with, knowing your child, knowing your student, and kind of getting a sense of, is this a big drastic change? Did they go from being a very cautious, calm, clear-minded person who really thought out decisions to all of a sudden the next week wanting to drive 100 miles per hour and use substances, skipping school? If it's a big drastic change, then it could be a sign that you need a little extra support. But again, kind of when in doubt, there's no harm in getting more information about kind of what's underneath that surface behavior. Sudden, overwhelming fear for no reason, sometimes paired with a racing heart, and physical discomfort or fast breathing. Seeing, hearing, believing things that aren't real. And again, those drastic changes in mood, behavior, personality, or sleeping habits, which again is a challenging thing for being a parent of an adolescent, because some of those things are just kind of part of the teenage experience. And a lot of families during the COVID crisis have faced real behavioral changes because everyone's at home more. There's more access to screens. There's less opportunities to get out of the house. So as across the board, people might be more prone to sleeping more, playing more video games, or being more reserved. But again, kind of following that gut intuition. And I am always blown away by how in tune parents are, and they're like, this just doesn't feel right. So if you feel that way, please reach out. Extreme difficulty concentrating or staying still that puts a person in physical danger or causes school failure. Intense worries or fears that get in the way of being able to complete or engage or participate in daily activities or activities for leisure. Throwing up using laxatives or not eating to lose weight. Significant weight loss or weight gain. This presentation isn't specifically about eating disorders, but there are some great resources in, I believe Melrose and the Emily program, or Emily project, that deal specifically with teens and adults with eating disorders. So if that is a concern, I highly recommend connecting with those organizations. Repeated use of alcohol or drugs, and trying to harm or kill oneself, or making plans to do so. I want to have a little note about child traumatic stress. Traumatic stress is the physical and emotional responses of a child or a youth to events or experiences that threaten the child's sense of security. Traumatic stress can affect all areas of child life in the home, school, and community. And there are a number of really great studies, including the ACEs study, specifically on trauma and the impact of trauma and how to build resilience. And the reason I note this here is, as you can kind of see from this slide, some of the traumatic events that can occur over a child's life. What a lot of professionals are noting for parents and caregivers right now is the last year or so has been a trauma. It's been a trauma in a lot of different ways. People have lost loved ones. There's been extreme isolation in some cases. There's been disruption to schedules. And, some children went without food or had, disruptions in their ability to connect to safe adults. So it's important to kind of carry that forward when we're talking and engaging with our youth, that even if they have been thriving or doing really well, that this past year has caused a lot of stress for families and kids. So just kind of keep that in mind.
Kate, I just wanted to jump in and mention that Mary and I attended ACEs training back in 2018 through, I believe it was Dakota County, and just absolutely fascinating information. 2 very full days full of wow, just like I said, lots of great details. One of the things that I think we were talking about after the training was over is the web of support model. And so one of the best things I think we can do for young people who have experienced what you've described, again, we all have to some degree, is to web up, to be finding those people, to be finding those supports. That is not a highly technical answer, but it does seem to be one of those things that does help kids with resilience and bouncing back from trauma.
Absolutely. And as we talk more about kind of what can be done to support the mental health of youth later on, those connections, the web of support anchors, all of those pieces are a vital part of both reacting to symptoms and preventing mental health symptoms. So that is a great note. And, this presentation is definitely the tip of the iceberg, tip of the umbrella. All of these slides, there's so much more detail that we could provide. So if this is a concern of yours, or if you want more about trauma and resilience and ACEs, I know Dakota County has some plans to do more trauma and resiliency training coming up in the spring, as well as us at NAMI will be hosting some parent ed nights on building resilience and coping with trauma. So if that's a topic, please seek out those additional support options. I just am checking out the chat here. Cassie says, I would say that COVID and how it has affected kids' lives, home, school, or other, is definitely an adverse childhood experience trauma. Absolutely. Yes, across the board. And then again, noting that people respond to trauma differently. And there's compounding factors, right? So it's across the board of trauma. But if a child already has other ACEs or adverse childhood experiences that they're coping with, or if they're also coping with cultural or racial trauma or racism or other things affecting, their ability to feel safe in the world, then that increases the negative effects of the COVID-19 trauma. Exactly. So the more types of trauma experience, the more likely trauma will affect a child's mental health. Now, it also doesn't mean that just because someone has experienced trauma, like we say that COVID-19 is a trauma across the board, that doesn't mean that everyone is going to have a mental health condition following that trauma. It just means that it's a thing. Everyone has experienced that trauma. That trauma is in people's bodies. and being able to cope with stress and trauma is a huge part of kind of preventative and reactive measures. These are a few of the common mental illnesses that affect students. I'm not going to read through each one. I'll let you guys read them. There's 2 on my slide that I've highlighted because they are not mental illnesses. ADHD and autism spectrum disorder are not mental illnesses. They are neurobehavioral disorders or developmental disorders. But we do know that studies have shown that having those conditions, having that brain wiring, puts people at an increased risk for developing mental illness. Likely due, or this is just kind of one theory, is that living with ADHD or living with autism, you might be facing certain things or interacting with the world in a different way. And those different interactions, those different support needs that you have from your brain wiring can make daily life more of a struggle or make accessing supports more of a struggle. So for example, I live with ADHD and also anxiety. And I know that anxiety or the things that I'm anxious about likely are due to the way ADHD impacts the way I learn. So it just kind of means that if you have a child who already has a diagnosis of ADHD or autism or other types of developmental conditions, it can put them at an increased risk for developing anxiety and depression, likely because of how they're having to interact or engage with the world and some of the struggles that condition can put into their daily life. Let's talk a little bit about anxiety. First of all, we all have anxiety. Anxiety is an emotion, it's a feeling, it's part of that fight, flight, freeze response. And I'm going to use Dr. Daniel Siegel's model of the brain. So if you make a fist with your hand, this is a very kind of crude model of the brain. And up here, your knuckles, we have your prefrontal cortex. And this is the part of the brain that handles all of the stuff like executive function, which we'll talk more about, logic, language processing, the ability to problem solve, the ability to think before you act, really complex social skills, all of the really great stuff that makes humans so awesome lives up here in the prefrontal cortex. Down here, your thumb and your palm is where your limbic system is, or your amygdala. And these are the parts of the brain that handle that fight, flight, freeze response. It's where emotions originate, big feelings. And this part of the brain is responsible for keeping you safe. So way back when, in evolutionary terms, when humans were faced with a predator and they needed to run away from a saber-toothed tiger, that monitoring system, that fight, flight, freeze response, would sense a threat in the environment and the brain would flip its lid. And that means that this fight, flight, freeze response would take over. And that's great because you don't want to, be faced with a threat and have to think like, should I run now? Would now be a good time to make my escape? No, you want that to just be automatic. You want to just react and go. Well, nowadays, we aren't facing many saber-toothed tigers, but the brain system evolution is a slow process. So the brain system hasn't caught up. So we're still flipping our lid and it's still responding to threats in exactly the same way, even though they're not saber-toothed tigers. It's taking a test or busy school days. It's germs, it's COVID-19. It's responding to stress in exactly the same way. And what I mean by that fight, flight, freeze response is it's a physical response. So if you think running away from saber-toothed tigers, what do you need to do? Well, digestion basically turns off. All of the blood is diverted to your limbs, so you're ready to fight or run away. So again, your heart rate increases, your breathing increases. All of those are these physical responses that would prepare you to fight or flee. Again, most of the stressors in our lives and our kids' lives, we don't really need to fight or run away, but our brains and our bodies are still responding from that same system. So anxiety specifically has all of these physical symptoms that go with it. You can be irritable, you can look terrified, frequent tears or frustration tolerance, but it can also have these physical symptoms of stomach aches or headaches, or just kind of that constant feeling tense. And the reason is because your muscles are ready. They're ready to react. So again, this isn't a presentation solely on anxiety, but there are some wonderful books out there. Specifically, Burnout is a new one by Emily Nagoski, and it talks about how to move through that stress response and how to help our kids move through that stress response. Because, you know, when you're flipping your lid and your fight, flight, freeze system gets activated in the class, for example, in a classroom, you might have a student who runs out of the classroom, but chances are they're going to just kind of make it through the day. And that tension, that energy that gets built up in preparation for that big response, it just kind of gets stuck. So having coping strategies later on to help move through that stress response system is really important. Obsessive compulsive disorder. I'm not going to go into huge detail about each specific. Everyone will get a copy of the PDF. So if you'd like to go through and kind of look more at the specific diagnoses, you can, but I just wanted to kind of quick include a few of them, especially since we're getting close and I want to leave time for questions. Depression, you can look for mood changes, feelings of hopelessness, loss of interest and pleasure. It can also be similar to that irritable mood or easy to anger, distractible, aggressive, excessive guilt and self-blame. Cognitive changes can also go hand in hand with depression. And that can look like difficulty concentrating, problems making decisions, slow movement, speech and thinking, forgetfulness, and suicidal thoughts or actions. And let's see, bipolar disorder kind of pairs some of the extremes of anxiety and called mania with depression. So it's kind of this cyclical thing where someone will have a really, really extreme side, which is mania, and then fall into a deep depression. My brother lives with bipolar disorder, and kind of the best example that I can come up with when I think of what that looks like is one day when he was about 21, he was in a state of mania and he decided that he was going to play for the Packers, the Green Bay Packers, and he had never played football before, but he was convinced that they were going to recruit him and that he was going to join the team. And then a week later, he was in kind of that depression cycle and had a really hard time getting out of bed. So if you are having a child or a youth in your life who's kind of having those really grandiose thoughts, and then accompanied by shortly after kind of a deep dive into depression, that could be a sign that you need to get a little extra help. ADHD and ADD, these are some of the symptoms of hyperactivity, kind of on the go, difficulty remaining seated, running around or climbing excessively, or difficulty engaging in activities quietly. And the inattentive symptoms are daydreams, can't pay attention, doesn't finish schoolwork, distractible, careless, and disorganized. And the reason I note this here is maybe what you're starting to see is that there's a lot of overlap of symptoms, right? We said disorganized or distractible was also a symptom or a behavior of depression. And it goes back to that. These are medical illnesses, but the symptoms are behavior. It's only that tip of the iceberg, and then it requires that deeper dive to figure out okay, what is actually driving that behavior? So if you're noticing that behavior, it doesn't mean that it's automatically this specific condition or this specific illness. You have to still dive a little bit deeper to uncover kind of what is the source of that. Here are a few impulsivity symptoms. And then as an adult living with ADHD, my impulsivity shows up with online purchasing. So impulsivity can mean lots of different things. It can mean that risk-taking behavior, that really easily observable behavior, but it can also show up in more subtle ways of, random online purchases, or maybe impulsive snacking when you're not really hungry. It can show up in lots of different ways. So again, it's just kind of finding ways to really tune into the behaviors and asking questions if something feels like it's not in line. So what can you do? Talk to a trusted adult, more than one if necessary, connecting with a friend. It's harder to do that in COVID times. Making use of platforms like Zoom, Google Hangouts, the phone. I've even talked with some people who've resumed writing letters and having pen pals again. Any way you can connect and widen your own social circle as an adult and kind of cultivate more anchors for yourself, I think that'll make you a stronger anchor for the kids in your life. Write a note and give it to someone who cares about you, or just kind of those random acts of kindness can be a mood boost for you and kind of flood your brain with those happy chemicals. And it can kind of help with if you're feeling a little bit down. Using resources or handouts, calling NAMI. There's lots of different treatment options. And I believe tomorrow's presentation is more specifically about the types of treatment or resources that are available. But there's a lot of different treatment and support options out there. Cognitive behavioral therapy, group therapy, being creative, things like art therapy or music therapy, other non-traditional ways like meditation, movement, exercise, and responding the earlier the better. I include this just more for frame of reference. Medication is a highly, it's a researched back way. We at NAMI don't ever say do one and not the other. I'm a big believer in, holistic and kind of looking at the whole person. And there's not just a quick fix for anything. And it can sometimes take multiple tries or multiple attempts. But I think it's just important to consider medication side effects and have that in the back of your mind as one of the treatment options that you're pursuing and going forward with full information. I noted executive function earlier. Executive function is that part of the brain in that upstairs brain, that prefrontal cortex, that is responsible for problem solving, planning, logic, staying organized, being able to kind of respond to organizational tasks and demands. And the reason I address it specifically is because in adolescents and middle school aged kids, there's a lot of demands on the executive function system. There's expectations that adults have of kids that age. They're going to be able to remember all of these things. They're going to keep on track of their assignments. They're going to, be able to plan long-term projects. All of these things are really complex executive function tasks. And all of the mental illnesses that we've talked about and ADHD affects executive function. So there's not an age that you can just expect a kid to be able to do something. It's okay to kind of go back and reteach kids how to use things like planners and tools like that. What can make symptoms better? Positive coping strategies, things like getting enough sleep, exercising, eating healthy, writing, being active. And these are all the keys to improving and maintaining mental health. I have a few slides listed in the PowerPoint on suicide, and I'm going to just let you review them. Normally I would give a kind of a trigger warning. I don't include any pictures on them in case people are triggered by it, but I will let you review that. And then NAMI, and it sounds like tomorrow, is more specifically on addressing suicide and suicide awareness prevention. But NAMI also holds regular QPR classes, which is a evidence-based suicide prevention model. How can you help a friend? Here's some other ones. Recognize early warning signs, encourage your friend to talk to an adult, share resources, include them in your plans, even if they say no. I think this is really important. If you have a friend or a child who's experiencing depression or anxiety and they're not really wanting to go out and do things or engage in that way, finding ways to still include them or invite them, even if they say no, just can still kind of create that feeling of connectedness, even if they're not ready to engage in those kinds of activities. Check in regularly, listen, and offer support. And I think this goes again back to that piece of making it part of normal everyday conversations, of not having it be something that you feel like you need to whisper or keep hush hush, but have it just be a part of a conversation. So I'm going to skip past the suicide slides. Remember, these are kind of the big takeaways I hope that you'll walk away with today, is that mental health conditions are medical illnesses and deserve the same amount of care, treatment, and responsivity that any physical illness would have. It's absolutely not anyone's fault. You can do all of the preventative measures that we've talked about, the proactive measures, and someone can still have a mental illness, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that you failed as a parent or that you failed yourself or didn't do enough. Sometimes there's just brain wiring that makes people more susceptible, and it's okay. It's not anyone's fault. It's important to know the warning signs and know that you are not alone. Recovery is possible, and there is hope. And then the last few slides are just about NAMI and how to kind of connect with us and engage if you have more questions or need more information. Are there any questions or comments or conversations people would like to have?
Such great information. I did put a link to NAMI in the chat. And of course, we'll have Kate's slides available on our website. And it can be a little overwhelming. There is a lot to think about, but I also think it's comforting to know that there are probably most of the people that you know, that you and I know, either are dealing with a mental health condition, or there's someone in the family or a good friend. They're just a lot more than we realize. So that's I think that's important to know. I do also have would love to just check in with everybody here. I do have a quick slide opportunity. We did this yesterday and it worked out really well. It is a tool called AHA Slides. And I just have two quick slides, two quick questions for everybody. And I put a link down in the chat. And so what you'll just want to do is look in the chat and click on the link that says AHA Slides / F42F0. And you can do that on your computer, on your tablet, on your phone. You simply click on that and you'll be presented with questions that you can answer. And then we're going to take a look at what your answers are right here on the slide itself, which again, I think is pretty cool. The first question is, what steps could we take to help reduce the stigma around mental illness? And I'm looking just for like 2 to 4 words, really simple. And we'll just, we'll give you a second there to think about that and to start to answer that. And then of course we have the chat for questions. And if you want to unmute your microphone and ask any questions. I think Kate has given us a wonderful range of information. And like I said, there is a lot, especially if you know someone who's dealing with or wrestling with or wanting to learn more about a mental illness or a mental health condition. That is super important. We're getting a few answers in. So let me do a screen share here and show you what you're saying, which again, I love this tool. So here are some suggestions from the folks that are on the call. Steps we could take to help reduce the stigma would include relationship building, connections. Love the dinner table conversation. I think that's a great idea. I know that was something that we dealt with in my family. We actually had family counseling when I was a young person, and that was very unusual at the time. It was right around the early 70s. But so I grew up with it. And to me, it was kind of like, well, if your sink is clogged, you call a plumber. If your car isn't working very well, you take it to a mechanic. If you need some help with wrestling with things or dealing with issues in a family or personally, you find a counselor. So yeah, the whole stigma piece was a little different for me growing up. I didn't quite get that. But of course, that is a reality for many people. Check-ins daily. I think that's great. I know my daughter just moved out. She was here for a good chunk of the year with COVID and just found her own place. So of course it's sad that she's left, but I'm also really happy that she's out on her own and has a good new job and is kind of taking those steps forward that COVID kind of blocked a little bit for some young people. Be kind, talk about it, be honest. Those are great suggestions. And we will have the AHA slides available for you to look at. So you'll be able to go back and reference these. And then we have a second question. So after you finish this one, your phone or your tablet should display the second question, which is, what's one idea you heard today which could help the mental health of the young people around you? And again, a lot of great information, but what's one takeaway that you think would be, again, useful to yourself or possibly to other people if they see this or they watch the presentation? We'll let folks take a second to answer that.
While people are answering, one thing that I want to share is this language of the brain and kind of that helping kids understand kind of those reactions and how they're originating and coming from. My kids are 7 and 3, so they're still pretty young, but we've been using this brain model since my oldest was 2. And he now just kind of notices when people are, oh, I think that person's in their downstairs brain. I think they flipped their lid. So it's never too young or never too late to start opening that conversation. And I think it's hugely freeing to start seeing your behaviors as the work of your brain. And again, anxiety is a natural and normal emotion and reaction. So helping kids understand that, you know, you're not doing something wrong. This is your brain doing everything it can to keep you healthy. And yes, now it's overreacting and we want to help it, you know, understand that these are not threats and, you know, here's how we do that. But I think using that language just frees up a lot of guilt that sometimes kids bear when they're having some of these behaviors, is that it's not their fault.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. If we give young people language that they are familiar with it and tools to recognize. My daughter, when she was little, they were actually talking about using sign language with children who were pre-verbal as a way of connecting and being able to make sense of the world around them. So there's a lot of things we can do to help our young people. Thank you so much for these great comments. I think that'll help Kate, that'll help us. We want to be recognizing of everybody's time, be honoring of your time. We are willing to stay on the call for a minute or two, a couple of minutes after. If you do have questions that you would like to share or to ask Kate or us, we're happy to stay on for a few minutes. Again, we do want to thank Alina Health and Tom Lutz and Associates, both of which have been sponsors for the webinar series. And we'd like to encourage you to register for the remaining webinars. The recordings and resources, we'll send those out to you, and then they'll also be on they'll be on our website. Go to the same place where you registered, and that's the starting point to look for the resources. please fill out the email evaluation. It's very short. And in our office, we have light bulbs. Excel Energy and Greenlight have a program to share LED light bulbs with people. So we have boxes of them. Please stop by. We're generally open 8 to 4. Mary and I are both working from home today, but we're generally there. And stop on in, get a Helping Kids Succeed handbook and some light bulbs. We're happy to have you do that. And please consider a donation to support our work if you found the webinars helpful. I have our contact information, and you can always reach us through the phone as well, 651-438-3337. And we thank all of you for taking your time. It's a lot. Everybody's very busy, but we appreciate you being willing to spend some time with us and with Kate. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise. And we'll say farewell, but we'll keep the feed going here for a few minutes in case people have questions.